In macroeconomics, the most important question is why some countries are richer than others. Why do we care about this? If we can crack the code that this secret to success, what is the secret to success? Why some countries end up being richer than other countries? Even they may start at the same level. They could be neighbors. They could be even the same people. Like, for example, Korea. You got same people living in two different countries, the same exact people, culture, language, everything, in the same geography, but living in two different countries. And now they have two completely different standards of life. Why? If we can answer this question, then we can find out the secret to success, how to make the countries rich. This is why it's so important. Now, the first serious attempt was made by Robert Solow, the American economist. The background to this model is the 1950s. After this World War II, half the world was like destroyed, and started in the 60s, the United States was the richest country on earth, and it had a steady economic growth. So Robert Solow, what was this discussion on Solow? Yeah, it was further. Had this idea that there will be convergence. What does convergence means? Convergence occurred when different countries with different initial levels of per capita income, they graviated to a similar income level. It basically says, remember from chapter 3, we said we have diminishing marginal return. As you get richer, your speed of growth will go down. So United States, very rich, but that's also means that the United States cannot grow as fast as, for example, China. China is a much poorer country, and because of that, it has faster economic growth. And when you have someone who is further in front but slower, and someone further back but faster, at some point the two will reach each other. Levels of per capita income. At some point, the two countries will be exactly the same, will have the exactly same per capita income. As we can see today, for example, in one of the best examples that Solow model provided, and like a strong suit of the model. And again, remember, this was created in the world after World War II. Two countries, Japan and Germany. These two countries were completely leveled because of the Second World War. And then, like, they were really poor, but they could grow really fast and catch up. And now if you look at, for example, Europe, you can see that Germany, France, and England, and Great Britain are on the same level of output. Even Germany is like a bit higher per capita output. So because of that difference in speed of growth, something I would use an example is like, have you heard about this race between a turtle and a rabbit?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it in my culture only?
No, I've heard it.
Oh, so it's universal. Perfect. So yeah, there is a rabbit very fast, but the rabbit goes super fast and reaches somewhere further ahead. But then the rabbit gets lazy and stops. The turtle is steady but slow, keeps moving until they catch up. and the turtle actually wins in the end, but that's like a story. In economics, rich countries they start with it, will gradually slow down, slow down. Can you see me?
You froze right after you said rich countries, and I think it just skipped the entire thing.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I think of my internet got problematic for a second. So, yeah, richer countries, they're further ahead, but their growth rate would be slower. Poorer countries, even though they're further back, they're faster. And this speed of growth will enable them to catch up. Some growth miracle countries in Asia have shown convergence big time, like Singapore or South Korea. They managed to quickly grow their economy and end up being on the same level as fully developed Western economies. On the other hand, remember, whenever there is a success story, there are sometimes, more than often, failure stories, stories of failure. Some African countries, they couldn't do that, and they even failed. Also in South America, if I want to use an example, Argentina. Argentina is also an example of a country that was actually further ahead. Argentina had a higher per capita income than France, but for some reason, for like many reasons, many bad decisions, bad luck, all things combined, Argentina slowly fell behind. So, as you can see, like 10 countries here, real per capita GDP in 10 countries. You can see that, for example, China started very poor, but grew rapidly. And this is 2008. Today, I think China is much higher. While United States started very high, but growth rate was slower. The slope, look at the slope. You can see South Korea here. South Korea is a miracle. It's what we call a success story because of the slope. The slope is real big. After that, you can see China, Japan. This is after World War II, the country was destroyed. They quickly caught up here. When they reached here, then they stabilized. Their growth rate was slower. This is like reconstruction period. They recovered from the war and then gradually grew until this point, and then they stayed the same. In 1990, all the way to 2008. Now, Solow model tries to explain this. Yeah, Robert Solow developed the Solow growth model in the 1950s to explain how saving rates and population growth determine capital accumulation, which in turn affects economic growth. So, in Solow's model, two things are the main drivers of economic growth. First of all, population growth, which brings you more workers. The second thing is saving rates. If you consider a country as a closed economy, like no trade with the outside world, saving would immediately mean investment. Remember the saving market, which was also on your exam. It was this one question. Now, this is saving, this is investment. At this point, the two meet each other. So saving saving would be equal to investment. We use, remember, Cobb-Douglas from chapter 3, the Cobb-Douglas aggregate production function with constant returns to scale. This is the function that we use to explain the Solow model's production. Here, there's a difference between with the models you've seen before. Here, we introduce the concept of time. So now we're talking about this production in this time, in time t. It could be 2000 or 2008 or 1950. Output in time t would be equal to a constant total factor productivity, which is technology, efficiency, all of those combined, physical capital at time t, and labor force at time t. Capital is stock at time t and labor at time t, and total factor productivity. Allows us to be more specific. T is the time that we're currently on, studying right now. T minus 1 is one period before. T plus 1 is one period ahead. This could be a year, this could be a season, a month, anything. Given a fixed level of labor, L can be expressed with the Solow model can be expressed in per worker terms. So because we want to know which countries are richer, why some countries end up being richer, we take out the population effect. If you put in the population effect, this is called the size effect in science. Your whole assessment will be completely off. Why? Because some countries could be very poor, but because of the huge size they have, they will end up being a really big economy. For example, India or China, they have like 1 billion people. They're not considered rich countries, but they're one of the biggest economies in the world. China is the second largest economy in the world. India, I think, is the fourth largest economy in the world. But if you take out the population effect, the size effect, the two countries are not really rich. On the other hand, Luxembourg or countries like with 200,000, 500,000 population, they can be very rich, but they have no part in the world economy, in the global economy, because of their size. So we immediately remove the population from this so that we can just look at how successful a country is economically. So remember, everything uppercase is the total output or total consumption or the total amount. If you take out the population effect, or in other words, divide it by L at the same time, the same period, you will end up with per labor values. This is not the same as per capita. Per capita is output per every single person in the population. This is output per worker. How many people are actively working? So not per capita. Per capita also considers children, considers elderly, considers stay-at-home spouses, considers everything. But output per worker only considers the output per active members of the economy, or in other words, the efficiency of the economy. Consumption per worker, investment per worker, and capital per worker. Capital per worker, it means how much tools are available for one single worker. For example, in agriculture, poor countries are often suffering from super low efficiency because of this capital per worker, because they don't have a tractor, they don't have all these advanced equipment than farmers in, for example, the United States have. In the United States, a tractor isn't exactly a luxury, but in some countries, a tractor can be very important, very expensive. This is because of the capital per worker, or we also call it capital labor ratio. Remember this? This is basically the only thing we're going to focus on in Solon model. Richer countries, they have more capital per worker, more expensive tools, more advanced fancy equipment than poorer countries. Now, you have your model here. Let's stick to this Douglas function. If you divide it by L, power 1. 1 on the denominator, you take this to the denominator, 0.7 becomes negative 0.7. So it will, if you take it down to the denominator, it will be 0.3. So it will be A KT 0.3 power 0.3 over LT power 0.3. If you can see this, the two of them have the same power, so you can rewrite it as A KT over LT power 0.3. Now, what is this?
Capital labor.
Exactly. So you can just rewrite it as this is very important. Why? Because it shows us your output per worker will be the same as you just multiply your capital per worker with that same power that capital had in the Cobb-Douglas function with the technology level or total factor productivity level. And of course, if you look at the slope of this, it will have diminishing marginal return. You can just take the slope of 2 points and compare them to each other. Or if you're feeling very brave, you could take a second derivative. I don't know if I should tell you this, like teach you this. On the exam, you don't need to take second derivatives. That's too advanced. But a second derivative is basically the slope of the slopes. It shows you how the slope of a function is changing over time. So if you have the function here, if you take the first derivative, have 0.3 a divided by -7. Now, if you take another derivative, -7.1 b minus 0.21, 21 here, multiplied by a over kt 1.7. This is the second derivative. See, this is the negative number. This is always positive. So the function will always be negative, will always go down. This shows that as you move forward, the slope of the function, this is the slope of the slope, rate of change in the rate of change. The rate of change as you move forward will go lower, lower, lower. As you move forward, you'll get slower. As the economy develops, as your country gets richer, your growth rate will be slower. United States, very rich, very slow growth. China, poor, but very fast growth. This is why the countries catch up. You don't need to take second derivatives. I just wanted to actually like show you how it's done. If you want to on the exam, you can always use second derivatives, and that's fine with me, but you don't have to be this too advanced for this course. So here you can see that the slope continues to fall. Basic assumption of the Solow model: we only focus on the domestic economy. We assume that there is no trade between nations. Assuming a closed economy and that government spending is also zero, there is no government. It's just probably my paradise. I don't get to see anyone. Closed economy. I live on my own on a farm probably somewhere, and there is no government. That would be great. Sometimes I wish I could do that. If you could live in the Solow model, that would be great. And of course, we assume things. Economists, they love to assume things. When a model, even a simplified model, gets tricky, you can always assume your way out of trouble. In fact, there is a joke amongst economists. The joke is that one day 3 economists go hiking. Then they fall into a ditch. Now they don't know how to get out. Their phones don't work. Anything doesn't work. So what they do is that they assume there is a ladder. They climb that ladder and they're saved. Basically shows what assumptions do in economics. We just use assumptions to get rid of problems that we have. Solow model needs this assumption, closed economy. Also, it needs to assume that government spending is zero, because different countries, they have very different governments. Like South Korea and North Korea, the only thing that they have in difference is the government. So government spending is zero, we just remove the government effect, and we're left with this. This was the GDP formula. C plus I plus G plus NX. No government, this is equal to 0. no trade with the outside world, this is equal to 0. You're left with this is what you're left with. And of course, you could divide them all by L, and you'll have the lowercase numbers, the lowercase variables. Also, we assume the saving rate is a fixed fraction of income. Remember saving rate? We talked about that we save a fraction of our income. Like you always face this decision whether to consume all your money, to go to a fancy restaurant or buy yourself a PS5 or a brand new car. You buy all those things that you want to buy, or you save. Each person, depending on different income level, will have a different saving level. Jeff Bezos, even after buying a private island, will have more money to save than, for example, someone like me, like a teacher, will have more money to save. Therefore, the saving rate would be different. In countries, we have the same rule. Different countries would have different saving rates. In solo model, because again, we don't want that trouble to talk about why saving rates are different amongst nations, we say that saving rate is a fixed fraction of income. So where did this come from? Remember, no government, no trade, so you have this. Also, this in a closed economy means that all your investments are coming from your savings. The people of this country save some of their money, and that money will only be used as investments. Nobody buys Bitcoin and hide it somewhere on the internet. Nobody puts cash in his or her mattress. You invest all your savings. And of course, your savings would be equal to your saving rate minus your output. What is the saving rate? The saving rate is how much of your output you have saved. So you could rewrite this equation as this. Proving a different equation. Yep, saving rate here. Yep, we have it here. Yep. So the output of the demand equation is equals this. And you can then rewrite this. Remember, we showed that output per worker is equal A capital per worker power 0.3. So you can just substitute the two and you'll be left with this second formula below. This is important. This is why I talked about the second derivative and the diminishing marginal. This is the Solow diagram. This shows why convergence happens. Any questions up to this point? Am I making sense? Perfect. Thank you. So, yeah. Each country has a fixed saving rate. A fraction of his income or the country's income would be saved. That saving would be immediately invested and be turned into capital. Remember, in economics, investment is buying physical capital. You buy yourself a tractor, that's investment. Buying bonds and like speculating on the stock market or going to Vegas and gamble in a casino are not investment, they're speculations. Investment is buying physical capital goods, like a tractor, like an 18-wheeler or a laptop that I use here, for example, to teach. These are all work equipment, tools. So you buy yourself new tools, new tools. At the same time, your old tools are being depreciated. Your old tools, they have a rate at which they becomes rusty and old and they need maintenance, they need replacement. This is a very important thing. In accounting, in management, in industrial engineering, your capital is constantly being depreciated. A brand new car, like a Ford Focus 2021, is not the same as a Focus model 2010. The car gets depreciated. And this is the depreciation rate. This is the Greek word, theta or delta. Never really learned these Greek words. I just assigned them funny names. So that's for myself. In my head, I just assigned them funny names. This was a cartoon character when I was a kid. Had this very interesting hair, so I assigned it that name. This is the depreciation rate. The rate, the speed at which your physical capital is being depreciated. Now, not every part of the physical capital has the same depreciation rate. If you want to understand depreciation rate, I don't know if you're into cars. I want to use an example. Have you heard about these Toyotas of the 1980s and 90s or early 20s or Hyundai Civic? They say that these cars, they never die. Like they never have any problem. They never get faulty. They never break down. Or a Nokia cell phone. They used to be very popular like 10 years ago, 15 years ago. A Nokia cell phone before all the smartphones were. These, they have a really low depreciation rate. Something that is very prone to breaking down and quickly gets rusty and needs to be replaced has a very high depreciation rate. This depreciation rate basically represents this. And also we assume that it's constant. You have a constant depreciation rate of your capital multiplied by your total physical capital. And also, you have your investment per worker. Remember, we talked about how we have diminishing marginal growth in investment and in capital and investment. Everything in economics has diminishing margin, or almost everything. So investment also, you start very poor, you don't have any tools. For example, you're a mechanic, you don't have any tools. A mechanic can have no income with no tools. You can just stay on the middle of I-77 of the highway and say, I'm a mechanic. You need some tools. The first toolbox you buy, very important. It will give you a lot of output. The second, you could buy a tow truck, then you could open a shop, then you could buy all the equipment, all those advanced tools that they use to diagnose cars and problems. And at some point, you have everything you need. So there is no reason to invest anymore. And your previous investments, the tools you bought, are also being depreciated all the time. The basic story that the Solow model has is that no matter where you start, you will end up at this point. You will arrive here. And once you arrive here, your country is fully developed. There is no more roads to build. There is no more factories to build, no more airports. You have already built everything. You just need to replace what's being depreciated. This is the point at which you just settle down and relax. And we call this steady state. New investments are still being made, but only to replace the depreciation of the old investments. For example, right now, United States is the most developed economy in the world. But there is, the country doesn't need roads, doesn't need bridges, but there is a huge argument going on for infrastructure, to pass an infrastructure bill that would invest a lot of money on building roads and bridges and everything. Why? Because they say our roads, our bridges, our airports, all of that have been depreciated. They have lost their efficiency. They're rusty and they need to be replaced and maintained. Therefore, you need investment to just make up for the lost capital, which is depreciated. This is the steady state. No matter where you start, if you start here on this point, you're very rich and you're investing a lot, like in 1990s United States, 1980s United States, the country was very rich and they were investing a lot, but gradually, because they were rich, they lowered their savings and started consuming more and more and more. Their saving rate gradually lowered to this point. And if you're a poor country, let's say China in 1980s, you need a lot of investments. You need to build roads, you need to buy tractors, you need to build farms. You invest a lot. As you invest, the return you get on your investments will go lower, lower, lower. At one point, the two countries would have the same situation. Again, remember, these are per capita levels. We take out the difference in population effects. This is called the steady state. You have depreciation here, and you have also your investment function, which we drove there. At this point, the two of them are the same. This is called, where's the steady state? Yes, capital per worker increases to reach the steady state levels of K star and I star. The steady state is when there is no more growth. You just settle down, you're happy, and the only reason for investment is to replace the already depreciated equipment. Right now, there's a huge argument about the steady state when it comes to environmental policy. There are like a really big group of people, especially in Europe, I read about them, that they believe that you need to lower the point of the steady state to our current situation by introducing government reforms, making the governments introduce social welfare programs just to help poor people have a higher standard of life. And then you can just remove economic growth in total. Why? Because of the environment. If you want to save the environment, the only way is to just stop growing the economy. Of course, you could say that, well, at this point, we're already destroying the economy. So if we stay here, we sit here, the only thing we're going to achieve is to destroy the economy, is destroy the environment. So what's the point? I mean, we can't go back. The only way probably is to go forward and see probably some miracle could save us down the road. That's one way to criticize that argument, but still, that is the argument. Steady state. No more economic growth. At this point, investment would be equal to depreciation. Any questions? I myself struggle with these a lot. I came from engineering, jumped right into economics. I was really hurt by these. So if you have any questions, don't worry. I know it could be like challenging to see all of this stuff for the first time. Don't hesitate to ask. If you don't want to ask right now, later you can send me an email, ask for office hours, all of them. The capital stock is determined by I equal Y plus C, as we talked about. Investment depreciation, we talked about this. The Solow model assumes the depreciation rate as a constant fraction of capital. Again, we assume depreciation rate is a constant. This is very important also because some countries may have very different depreciation rates depending on their technology. If I want to use an engineering example, if you consider like a factory, if that factory has a more competent maintenance part, I myself, like, I studied maintenance in industrial engineering. My focus was maintenance. If the factory has a more competent maintenance department, the depreciation rate of that factory would be lower. Maintenance is very important. But in Solow model, we assume everybody has the same, just to make it, again, easier. You don't want to go and like spend time 200 different countries in the world, learn their different depreciation rates. You just assume there's a constant depreciation rate. Capital accumulation equation also shows the change in capital stock per worker. This shows how each year workers have better tools or worse tools if their delta KT is less than 0. This is investments minus depreciated capital. You can replace this with that formula we drove. We derived, sorry. Remember the saving rate. At a steady state, remember, we said investment is equal your depreciated capital. There is no more growth. You just settle down. So this will be zero. Nothing would change. At a steady state, it's steady. Nothing would change. So your S AK.3 would be equal to delta 80. These two will be equal to each other. Also in economics, star is used to show steady states or equilibrium. The market also reaches a steady state at equilibrium. When supply and demand meet each other, they shake hands. That dot in the middle, that's the steady state, which we use star to denote it. If the economy's initial capital labor ratio is at K1, which is lower than KT, that's the point where a country is very poor. So the country keeps growing and growing and growing until it reaches K star. If the economy's initial capital labor ratio is at K2, this point, this is a very rich country. The country would gradually stop investing, like lower investing, lower saving, like the United States. Saving rate went down, if you remember. Saving rate constantly went down. The country was rich, so they saved less and less and less until they arrived at this steady state. Output per worker also moves steady state value as KT moves toward its steady state. This point here. There are some really interesting things in this chart. You can draw this. This is your fixed depreciation rate. This is your investment. What is your total output? It's your investments plus your consumption. If you just add your consumption, this will be your total output. The difference between the two curves are the consumption level. Remember, you can only save your money or consume it. If you have saved or invested this much, that means you have consumed the rest. The difference at each period, at each point in time, is consumption. These are all consumption. Now, this is the beauty of the Solow model. As the countries get richer, their consumption increases. there is also a really big problem of the Solow model. If you start here, if you're a very rich country, according to Solow model, your income and your output per worker, and therefore your income and therefore your consumption will gradually go down until it reaches the steady state. This is a problem with the Solow model. The Solow model, because we took too many liberties with assumptions, we made too many simplifications, we lost some really important things. This is a problem. A country's income doesn't need to go down per capita level. People of richer countries, they don't become poorer over time. They actually become richer and richer and richer. If since 1980s in the United States, you had constant reduction in saving, but income level and standard of life and consumption grew rapidly because of efficiency, increase in efficiency. Solow model doesn't account for efficiency. It's all savings or investments. You could argue that since 1980s, real wages have been very steady and actually going down in some cases. That's also a valid argument. If you take out all the high income parts of the population, that would be a valid criticism of my criticism for the Solow model. But that would be too advanced. So according to Solow model, if you're a very poor country and you start here, your consumption would gradually increase until you reach this point, which is the steady state. If you're a very rich country, you start here, your consumption will gradually go down because you will gradually become poorer until you arrive here. And at this point, everybody would be on the same level. You should also remember that many of these theories were at least indirectly tried to answer Karl Marx's prediction. Why am I saying that? Because Karl Marx predicted that consumption for the worker class will constantly go down because people will have kids, labor will go up, like you have more and more workers, and eventually workers will be like more and more, your output will be fixed. This is uppercase Y. This would be fixed, and this would go up and up and up. Therefore, your output per worker or income per worker would go down. Of course, the real argument is like more advanced than that, but this is the simplified version. What happens then is that workers will be poorer and poorer and poorer until a point when they can take it no more, and then they will revolt. And this model shows you that that's not the case. Why? Because of this diminishing marginal return. Consumption will constantly go up because you have investment. Consumption doesn't need to go down and down and down because of increase in population. Now, remember this part about increase in population. We're going to come back to this later. Because CT equals 1 minus saving rates. Where does this come from? savings. And savings equals saving rate multiplied by output. If you substitute these two, YT minus CT would be equal to, this is what we showed before. If you take this to the other side, this SYT to the other side, you would have YT minus SYT equals CT. If you factor out Y's, you would have 1 minus S, YT equals CT. Because CT equals 1 minus S multiplied by YT, consumption per worker also reaches its steady state, CT equals C star, when YT equals Y star. It's just a fixed amount. Saving rate is a fixed amount, another consumption. So when any of these reaches a certain level, the other steady state, and doesn't move after that, the other one will necessarily will not move after that, because 1 minus S is a fixed number. YT is where the economy will move to and stay if initially it starts away from the steady state. In other words, the steady state is where the economy converges to in the long run, and so is in the long run equilibrium. This is a very beautiful picture. It shows you Solow model in the most simple way possible. You see, imagine a bathtub. This water is capital, is physical capital, your tools, your equipment. You open this, water comes in. That's your investment, your new investments. At the same time, there is a hole in the bathtub, which is the depreciation rate. Water leaves. The steady state is when the bathtub is full enough that you don't want it to be like more full of water. You don't want it to be overfilled. So what you do is that you adjust it so that the rate of new water coming in would be equal to the new to the rate of water going out. This would be the steady state. Like assume you want to take a bath here. You keep filling the tank, the bathtub, until it becomes full. When it becomes full, you would gradually lower the rate at which water comes in the bathtub. At steady state, you would just adjust it so it would be the same as the rate that of the water that's going out into the sink, into the hole. So your capital would stay the same. The water level would not go up and down, would stay the same. Your investment would be equal to your depreciation. The rate of water coming in the bathtub would be exactly equal to the rate of depreciation. Solow model suggests that similar economies will experience convergence. They will catch up. Countries with low initial levels of capital and output per worker will grow rapidly as KT and YT will rise until they reach their steady state. United States and China. China, very fast, but poorer. United States, much richer, but slower. Eventually, imagine these 2 points. This is moving very slow, this is moving fast. They will converge. grows slowly. Countries with high initial levels of capital and output per worker will grow slowly. There is a strong evidence of convergence among wealthy nations. Evidence of convergence breaks down when we extend the analysis to a larger group of rich and poor countries. Perhaps because many of those economies are not similar, mostly due to differences in productivity. Evidence in convergence, like you don't see poorer countries actually growing the economy. This is very troubling. Like right now, if you look at the rate of economic growth, poor countries, this is one of the challenges of the world, in my opinion. That poor countries are not really growing. They're just left there. They're like forgotten. They're at some place, they're just not growing. They're already at their own steady state. Some poor countries, they're growing very fast. The rest, they're not growing. They're just staying there with like 1%, 2%. United States has a higher economic growth than most poor countries, than many poor countries. So if you forget about the wealthy nations, evidence of convergence doesn't necessarily hold up. And that's a really bad thing. It could show incompetent governments. It could show environmental problems. Like, for example, if you have no water, if you're like in the middle of a desert and you have no oil, desert countries are lucky. For example, Iran has a lot of desert. It's a dry country, but we also have oil. But some countries, they don't have water, they don't have lumber, they don't have forests, all those resources that you can use to grow your economy, and they also don't have any fossil fuel deposits. So these countries, they remain poor. It could also be wars, political problems, bad governance, mistakes that governments take, especially like in creating inflation and things like that. I use the example of Argentina because they made a lot of mistakes. Argentina single-handedly destroys the solo model because they made so many mistakes in running the banking sector, especially like there was this government, there were generals, all of them were like generals. And like they decided because they have tanks, they rule the country. One day, one of these generals went to the central bank and he saw these gold reserves that they had in the central bank. And he asked the central bank head, why aren't you giving this so much gold here? Why aren't you giving this to poor people? You're keeping them for yourself. The economist tries to explain to him that that's not how it works. These are gold reserves to keep the value of our currency up and blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, if you don't have an army and someone with an army disagrees with you, the person with an army will end up being right. So what they did is that they just increased their expenditure a lot to provide social welfare programs, and they just got rid of all their gold reserves, their currency depreciated, and the whole economy, as we talked about, costs of inflation, bad things happen, bad things happen. In solo model, you don't have bad governments. You have the same way of thinking, the same mindset, the same strategies across all nations. So this evidence doesn't exist when you focus on poorer countries, especially. You see, this is convergence, evidence of convergence amongst OECD countries or rich countries. OECD countries are the developed countries. their growth rate, as they become richer and richer, their growth rate would be lower and lower. But amongst poorer countries, different story. You have some countries like China and South Korea with competent governments, with good policies, with available resources. Also, you must have something to be built here upon, to build your economy upon, with lots of trees, lots of forests, water reserves, lots of access to the world markets that they can grow so fast. On the other hand, you have countries that are very poor and they're not growing. These countries. You see, there are countries that are very poor and their growth rate is less than the richest country in the world, which is the United States. Doesn't make sense according to Solow model. That's a problem with the Solow model. Immediately after the Second World War, levels of capital per worker in Germany and Japan were very low. Why? Because the two countries were completely destroyed. The Japanese prime minister, they had this prime minister in the 70s and 80s, Shigeru Yoshida. I read his book, Years of Crisis. That's the name of his book. If you're interested in knowing about the Japanese economy, that's his memoir. Very good book. In that book, I'm not sure if it was written in the book or was a speech from some other time. But he says that we should be thankful of United States for bombing our industries because they were very old and depreciated. He jokes about that. The two countries were completely leveled. They had no factories, no capital. They were like very poor countries. Like, for example, Germany was like as rich as Iran, even though Germany was like a very developed country and Iran was still in early stages of development. Because of the war and all the destruction, Germany went down to our level. So their capital per worker was very low. But because of that difference in growth rates that Solow says, Germany managed to catch up real fast. They grow very rapidly and they caught up with United States, with Great Britain, with France, and all those countries that weren't as heavily affected by the World War II as Germany. The same also exists for Japan. Of course, there were like lots of other arguments, like the Marshall Plan, that United States had this plan, which was to reconstruct Europe. I'm not sure if there was a similar plan for Japan, but I know that for a fact that Western Germany, because of the United States investments, you had all of that. And you don't see the same convergence in Eastern Germany. After the war, Germany was partitioned into two parts, Western Germany and Eastern Germany. Western Germany grew very fast and managed to achieve convergence, but Eastern Germany fell behind. This is another problem in the Solow model. It assumes every country has the same style of government. Germany, same people, same culture, same language, same everything. Two governments, completely different results. The Solow growth model correctly predicts that the level of per capita capital per worker in both countries would rise very rapidly, boosting their income per worker to early 70s. After 72, growth rates of both economies after Reconstruction was finished and they caught up, growth rates of both economies slowed down as their per capita income became close to that of other rich countries. As when they caught up, the growth rate went down, and went down. Now, after this point, we're going to talk about what happens if we change policy, if we play with the saving rates, for example, if we play with tax rate, with consumption. These are all exam questions. This is what macroeconomics is for. Up to this point, we try to explain the world. There is a Solow model. This is how the world works. Now we're going to play with it. We're going to say, okay, for example, if the government increases saving rates somehow, for example, by taxing consumption, introducing a value-added tax, incentivizing people to save more and consume less, what will happen? The increase in saving results in higher steady states level of capital and output per worker. The idea is if you can persuade your people to save more, in the long run, the country would end up at a much better steady state. If you can have this system that incentivizes savings over consumption, in the long run, by increasing the saving rate, which again we assumed it's a fixed number, in the long run, you will have a richer country. You will have higher standards of life. The increase in saving results in higher steady state level of capital and output per worker. Changes in the saving rate affect the level of capital and output per worker, but not the long run growth rates of these variables. Again, the rate of growth will not change. The speed at which you're growing your economy doesn't change. But the point that you the levels will change. Changes in the saving rate affects the level of capital and output per worker, but not the long run growth rates. Assuming the ratio of workers to population is similar across the nations, across countries, that means that this is another assumption. We assume that countries, they have the same ratio of workers to population. So families all over the world would have the same number of children, the same number of old people retired, the same number of students in school, the same number of everything in the population. So population dynamics of a country, same all over the world. In this case, the higher the country's national saving rate, and therefore the higher its investment, the higher would be its, the higher is its per capita income. By increasing S, this is very nice. You can see if you increase S, your capital depreciation rate doesn't change. By increasing S, you can easily shift the output function, the investment function higher, and achieve a higher steady state level. This means country would be richer in the long run. Standard of life would be higher. Everything would be better if you can incentivize more savings. But the growth rate doesn't change. The slope doesn't change. You will just arrive at a better steady state. The slope of the function doesn't change. Yeah, this is a nice curve. You can see that an increase in the saving rate causes capital and output per worker to rise. And until capital per worker reaches a steady state level of K2, where both capital and output per worker would stop rising. International evidence on the relationship of per capita income and saving rates. You see, it's all over the place. But still, you can see that more savings are usually leading to like above average income level. This line here, this is separating poor countries from rich countries. You have United States, low saving rate, but you have Japan, very high saving rate. United States is richer, but saving rate is lower. So this doesn't really hold. I mean, but that's an assumption. That's the result of many assumptions in the Solow model. I even once heard that if you look at this curve, you can see that this right side are all Asian countries, because Asian culture is altruistic. It's more in the long term. That's why you have Japan, South Korea, Singapore, and China all here. That was an interesting perspective. Okay, I think it's enough for today. Let me just take an attendance very quickly, and then I'll let you go. Any questions? Brandon Atkins
Here.
and Noah Albertson. Adil Al-Ghamdi.
Here.
Devin Amen.
Here.
Alex Battistoni. Andrew Battistoni.
Here.
I'm very curious. Are you two guys related? Andrew and Alex?
Yeah, he's my brother. But
Thank you.
yeah, we don't live in the same place.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I wanted to ask that, like oppress myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's nice. So that was very interesting. Like Jessica Beltrani, Danny Blakeman, Corey Bowles,
I'm here.
Megan Kando, Brandon Cosia de Ferro,
Here.
James Dominguez,
Here.
Yossi Escobar,
Here.
William Franzoni,
Here.
Seth Freeman,
Here.
Noah, I got you. Let me just